pleasure to be here. And I know that from my previous experiences that most people want to find out what they can do to get their work published. Some of you may be here as literary people, but I find that most of my audiences are interested in becoming writers. So I'll go into that first, and then I'll talk about the book and literature, etc. Feel free to leave at any time, and I hope that you're all warmly welcome to stay, of course. But I know that people have families and engagements, etc. So becoming a writer is a lot like becoming anything else. You have to go through an apprenticeship. You have to have, in the case of writing, which is a literary art, you have to have great passion for it because you'll be knocked down and out of the box, to use baseball vernacular, very quickly. It's like trying to get into the major leagues. You know, you go through all kinds of minor leagues, and very, very few ever make it in the majors, including me. I don't consider myself as a major writer by any means. But I have gone through the minors, and I started out when I was in the Navy. This was in the 1940s. I was a newspaper man. So that's one way to start off. Doesn't get your work published, but it does get it published in your local newspaper. Very few newspapers publish fiction. They will publish feature articles. And you can get paid for it. In my case, my pay came from Uncle Sam because I was in the Navy. But it was a steady check. I think it was $28 a month. I get that confused with my room rent in Ann Arbor when I went to the university. But I think that's what I was paid as a sailor. And I became the editor of the newspaper at Great Lakes. And I was 18, so that tells you something about the Navy. I had one semester at the University of Michigan. I've been an apprentice reporter. And one day, a little guy, I was sleeping on my bunk, and he came to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you Komie?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're my ticket out of the Navy because of all the files that we've gone through," and they didn't have computers in those days. "You're the only one that's had any newspaper experience. You're the editor of the paper." Well, that was the Navy, and I went to the Highland Park Library and got a book out called How to Edit a Newspaper. I was in this service and became the editor. Well, the fellow's name who tapped me on the shoulder was S.S. Harrison, Selig Harrison. He was from Pittsburgh. He was a smart little guy, about this high, smart as a whip. He went to Harvard after he got out of the Navy, and he became the editor of the Harvard Crimson. And then the last I heard of him, he was in New Delhi with the Associated Press. And then he wrote some books on India. And I hadn't heard of Selig for 50 years maybe, because we're talking about the 40s. The war was over, by the way, when I was in the service. It just ended. I got out of high school in 1945. The war ended in September 45. But about 2 or 3 years ago, when we were in this atomic crisis with North Korea, when Kim Il-sung, the senior Kim Il-sung, was threatening the world with atomic annihilation, we sent a negotiator over to negotiate with him. And who was it? It was Selig Harrison. And I saw him sitting there next to Kim Il-sung, and I thought, well, the world's in good hands. And that's the last I've heard of him. Kim Il-sung is dead. His son is now the head of North Korea. We haven't had an atomic catastrophe. And who knows, Harrison may show up tonight and bring me into the government to send me over to Yugoslavia. I doubt it. He was with the Rand Institute, so it's a big think tank in Washington. Well, that doesn't tell you how to publish a book, but it talks a little bit about how the contacts you make throughout your life, somehow the roads lead in all different directions. And of course, Robert Frost wrote that famous poem about the two roads that converged, and one went down one path and one went down the other, and I think the line was, and that's made all the difference. So he took one of them, and so you have all these choices. If you want to make a living as a writer, you really can't do it as a freelancer. That's just a romantic notion. I've represented many writers. I only know one person who makes a living, fragile at that, as a freelance writer, a woman, works like a dog, always on deadline, you know, always behind in her rent and her utilities, no medical, no benefits, no insurance. It's just a freelance writer is an extremely difficult position to be in. So I wouldn't try that. How to get published? Well, as you're an apprentice, if you want to write fiction, you write short stories and you would send them out to places that publish them. Who publishes fiction? Short stories, poems. We'll leave novels for a moment. Well, they're mostly published in what are called literary quarterlies. I'm sure you're familiar with them. Almost every university now has a literary quarterly. When I came out of school, there weren't any literary quarterlies. Now there's almost an industry built around the teaching of creative writing in the universities. So that's one path to follow. If you want to be a teacher, and if you're not an academician, if you're really a creative writer, you'll be very, very frustrated if you're teaching English to students. Many writers do that, but most of them today are in the creative writing departments, and there they get salaries and benefits and raise families and lead lives without all the vicissitudes of being a freelancer. However, that does tend to make a lot of our fiction come from the same sources. Most of it comes out of the universities, the short fiction. I'm not talking about the stuff that's sent to romance magazines or to magazines that publish the type of fiction that is really the kind of stuff that you read in these pocket Harlequin romances, etc. I'm talking about serious fiction. Where is it published? In the universities. Now, where here are the literary magazines that you could send to in Illinois? You're not confined to Illinois because the odds are that the smaller colleges, wherever, will be interested in taking your work. They won't pay you for it. God forbid, you know, that the writer should get paid. Sometimes you get paid in copies. Most times you get copies of the issue in which your story appeared. But there is a large spectrum of these literary magazines. When I started off, I actually, because I had a secretary and I was a lawyer, I kept a chart, you know, and I must have had 12 to 15 magazines that I would send to at any one time. And I would mark them in and out with regularity. And I think it took me 4 years of that to get my first story published, which was in 1973 by Eastern Illinois University. The magazine was called Caramoo, which is a kind of blackbird, I think an African word for a blackbird. And I was so excited that I went down there unannounced and took the whole staff out, bought them hamburgers and beer for lunch. My first story. Alan Neff was the editor. He was a nice man, and shortly thereafter he died. I remember I brought my son with me. He was so bored by my oldest son by the whole event that he went fishing in the local river and caught a big catfish. I can still see my family at the train holding up the acceptance letter from Karamu. So you can do the same thing. Those literary magazines at the colleges, particularly the small colleges, are eager to receive stories from writers. Then if you want to take a step above that, you would step into a little larger universities. And I remember my early stories were published. The next one was published by the University of South Dakota Review in Vermilion, South Dakota. John Milton, editor. That's a great name for an editor. And under the notes on contributors, he said Lowell Komie is probably the most patient contributor that the SDR has ever had. Well, I knew that if I opened my mouth, that they might just dump the story. And they did publish it. And it was pure Hemingway. It was about two men fishing in Key West, and I'm publishing it myself in my new collection that's going to come out in the summer called The Night Swimmer and Other Stories. It's in that reader article. Because I want to show the public how I was writing back then. Most of us, the young men that came out of the university, copied Hemingway. He was our hero. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway, and then Truman Capote came on. And we didn't know anything about women writers. We just, we were Hemingway men. And it takes a long, long time to shake that style. The one thing we learned from it was simplicity. But you can't go through life of being a Hemingway man. I mean, life is much more difficult than that. And he wasn't too happy at the end anyway. So it took me years to step away from his influence. But he did, in a way, change the course of American letters in the century because he simplified it. He urged people to write in simple declarative sentences and to use nuances. Well, now I then went to the Kansas Quarterly. I've had 40 short stories published at least, so I can't remember really back in those days what I was doing, but I do know that I had the chart, I sent them out. I never received $1 for any of them. And I never was paid anything for anything I wrote until I think there was a magazine in Chicago, a predecessor of Chicago magazine called the Hyde Parker. They had an unusual editorial system. They were barricaded in their offices down on the south side, and they would lower a bucket from the third floor. You'd put the story in the bucket, and they'd pull it up, and you'd hear from them. And I think they gave me $50. The story is called Picasso is Dead. It's in one of my collections, and it was about the death of Picasso, but it was really about my frustration at trying to become a writer, and also about my family. Yes?
If you don't get paid for these stories, do you retain the copyright for them, or
Yes.
If you don't sign any contracts or anything, it's still your story then, correct?
Right. Right. You retain the copyright.
So you can use it again, like you're saying?
Yes, you sell to them what they call one-time North American rights only, and you retain the copyright. It would be better if you took all your stories and sent them to Washington. You could copyright them as a series. I think it only costs $20. And then you would have a U.S. sanctioned registered copyright, which is much better because it gives you more remedies than just a common law copyright. But it is the best practice is to do that in advance. When you write something that you think is good and worthy of saving, send it off to the Register of Copyrights. It's only $20, and then you don't have to worry about it forever. Then let's talk about poetry. I think that I can handle that very quickly because I'm not a poet. I've written one poem in my life, and I've been around poets for years because in the suburbs there are literary circles. I don't know if there's one at the Des Plaines Library. We've had one at Deerfield for years, and called the Poetry Forum. And I used to go and sit there, and there were both men and women there, and I made many good friends. Martha remembers the Poetry Forum. And we started a literary magazine, a poetry journal called Rhino, which has grown and grown, and it's still in existence. It's a very good magazine, and it's published out of Evanston. They've gotten a lot of grants from the Illinois Arts Council, and they did publish some of the paragraphs, just a paragraph of prose. But for every college literary magazine, there may be 5 to 10 poetry magazines, because poetry magazines, I think, are not as expensive to produce, although I'm sure people would take exception to that. But, you know, you can put out chapbooks. I have friends that do that. Norbert Bly, for instance, up in Door County, is a wonderful writer. He encourages young writers, and he puts out a series of chapbooks in Door County, Wisconsin, for writers that he thinks deserve attention. But poets send to the universities, to the private quarterlies, and their lists. I mean, you can go into Barnes & Noble or any independent bookstore and buy books that show you the addresses of the literary quarterlies, where to send, how to send, and also the poetry journals. And how to send is very important because you must always include a self-addressed stamped envelope. Otherwise, you won't get your work back. They can't afford to, nor do they have time to deal with you, type up a letter, put on stamps, send it back to you. So you must always remember to put in a self-addressed stamped envelope. I have also worked on the other end. I was a volunteer editor for Story Quarterly, which was founded by people who are originally met in Highland Park in private literary groups. And now Story Quarterly is a very fine, prominent a journal of fiction. The two co-editors, Ann Brashler and Marie Mitchell, will be at the Wheeling Library this Sunday at 2 o'clock. And if you want to hear about how you get short prose published, short stories, go see them and ask them their opinion. But I remember as an editor, I would get just stacks of these short stories in brown envelopes. I used to hate the sight of them. Take home 10 or 15 of them. And after a while, as a writer, I became very competitive with the people who were submitting. You know, I would say, I can do better than that, or this is no good, etc. And I would reject everything. So I know I'm not an editor. I'm just not an editor. And now turning to the novel, someone said, well, good old lens crafter as well, it's all right. Someone said, well, you haven't had any luck with agents. Apparently you don't have much faith in them. And that's true. If you read the Reader article, you'll see I've had 4 or 5 agents that starts off. And I have never had luck with any of them. They've never sold anything of mine. It's been a waste of time for me. I've been writing for 40 years now. But that is the traditional route, and you never know. Some agent will like your work and really try hard for you. You just have to make certain that you submit to the right type of agent. And once again, these books that are put out by Writer's Digest, you can get them in the bookstores. They list the agents, their names. Almost all of them are in New York. what their particular interests are. Do they handle fiction, nonfiction? What percentage of their work is in what field? With them, you have to write them a so-called query letter. Don't send them your manuscript. Just send them a query letter, no manuscript, no sample chapters, and just tell them a little bit in one paragraph what the story is about. And once again, the envelope, please, with the stamp on it, or you won't hear from them. And they may write you back. Some of the biggest agents in the world could write to you and say, I'd like to see your manuscript. You never know. You just never know.
We have a lot of literary agents in the Chicago area. I had an opportunity to deal with a few. I suppose I want to know if there's any substance there, once they review it, before you send it forward.
I have no confidence in any literary agent in Chicago. I don't know any that are worthy of the name literary agent. Now, I'm sure there are some, but I've never met them. So I think it's a waste of time to circulate your work to literary agents in Chicago. But that's me, you know.
Well, I got that same impression without even having any basic knowledge, especially when they charge them $500 or $600 just to read it.
Well, that's a racket. Yeah.
That's why I don't.
I'm glad you brought that up, because a real agent doesn't charge you to read your work. If they ask you for money, you know you're dealing with someone who is just out to get some money from you. Don't ever do that. After all, it's your talent and your work that it will interest them. They can tell in a minute whether or not it's up in their field. I still occasionally send things out to agents because you never know. Like, this book could be made into a movie, and it's not going to be made into a movie by my selling it myself. So there is a. I had an agent call me from Palo Alto, California, a few weeks ago. In very hushed tone, she said she was on her car phone. I pulled over to the side. Would I please send her the Jewish shortstop? She'd read about it, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I don't get too excited over that kind of stuff. I got it back from her the other day, and it was with a very nice note. I'll always, if someone calls me and asks me, I'll send them my work. I'm not above that. But I know, in my particular case, that I have had to, in the end, publish my own work. And I'll get into that. I have had work published by others. The first publisher I had was the American Bar Association. And that was, I believe, in 1983. They took all my stories, many of which had been published in legal journals and were about lawyers. And the ABA took 13 of them and put them in a book called The Judge's Chambers. And that was the first time they ever published fiction. Then a company called Academy Chicago, which publishes fiction in Chicago, published my next book, which was the same, The Judge's Chambers. See, I retained the copyright. The American Bar Association just gave me a letter reassigning all that to me. And Academy Chicago published The Judge's Chambers again, but it had one more story in it, I think 13 stories. And I retained the copyright. The copyright page must show that it's in your name, not in the publisher's name. And then they were going to publish The Jewish Shortstop also. But we finally canceled our agreement, and I took it back. And now we're talking about 1989. And so I'd had two separate individual commercial publishing experiences. And I just didn't feel like taking this book and sending it out again and again and again and again. I had, in order to write it, I'd sold half my law practice. I took an apartment in downtown Chicago, and I spent a year writing it, which talks about it in the article. And I can't believe it, another 9 years, it says. I think I just put it away and forgot about it for a while. But it was another 9 years before my son said to me, look, let's get this thing out. It doesn't do any good to have it in the drawer. And I'd had a lot of success then. In those days, the Chicago Tribune magazine was publishing fiction. It used to be a serious magazine. Now it's just sort of a glossy magazine that really wasn't, it isn't a shadow of what it used to be. Not because it doesn't publish me. It doesn't publish any fiction. Why? Because they had a market study that people don't read fiction in Chicago. So they dropped it. Chicago Magazine used to be a very good magazine. When my friend John Fink was the editor, God bless him, he passed away several years ago. They don't publish fiction anymore. They haven't for years. So the two major sources for fiction in Chicago, magazine sources, are gone. So who does publish short fiction in Chicago? Playboy. Can you imagine how many manuscripts a week they must get? The New Yorker gets about 3,000 a week. The universities, Tri-Quarterly, which is a very serious journal at Northwestern, but the odds of your getting anything Tri-Quarterly are extremely high. They publish, recently they've had an emphasis on Eastern European writers. And your story about your life in Chicago, if that's what you're going to write about, isn't really going to get through to them. University of Chicago has a magazine. I think it's sort of isolated down in Hyde Park. I really don't know what they do. But they've been in existence for many years, Chicago Review. The University of Illinois, Circle Campus, I think has the strongest fiction department. They have some very good writers there. Michael Anania is a poet, chairman of the department. He's also a novelist, very fine novelist. The gentleman who won the National Fiction Award for Paco's story, Larry Heinemann. It's hard for me to remember all these names. I've never met him, but he's a wonderful writer. Eugene Wildman is at the University of Chicago Circle. I'm sure I'm forgetting people. Paulette Resky just won the Sandberg Award. She, I believe, is the editor of the literary magazine at the College of Lake County, which has its own literary magazine. She would be very receptive to receiving poems or stories from you. Roosevelt University has a literary magazine. I don't remember the name of it. Had one for years. So there are seeds of growing in the Chicago area, but they're very fragile. The last one I want to mention is really a good one, which is Other Voices, Other Rooms, and that is at Circle Campus and was started by some friends of mine who came out of the Highland Park, Deerfield area and started Rhino, Story Quarterly, and Other Voices, Other Rooms. And there's no reason why the people in this suburb couldn't start their own literary and cultural magazine. You may have one, or poetry journal, right here in this library. I saw, Chris showed me a picture of the beautiful new library that you're going to have. What a marvelous thing that's going to be. I mean, it's a real credit to, this community deserves credit for building that. It's just beautiful. And why not have your own journal coming out of there? Start it here and take it over there. It's portable. It'll outlast all of you, believe me. Rhino's an example of it. And of course, in Chicago, you know, the most famous journal of all was Poetry Magazine, started by, I believe, Harriet Monroe. At least she was one of the early editors. And she encouraged many, many great writers. Some of the earliest works by, I believe, T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound were published by Harriet Monroe here in Chicago, even though they were in Paris at the time. So I'll go into some literary stuff now and get off the marketing. unless you have a question about it.
Well, pertaining to what you're about to go into, how do you define literary fiction? How is it differentiated from?
Good
let's say,
question.
popular fiction?
Or also from creative nonfiction.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm capable of doing that. It's a sense, it's just a sixth sense, you know. It's a little more serious. It's not about young girls falling in love or young men reciprocating their love and walking hand in hand by the river on a Sunday afternoon on their way home from church. You know, it's not banal. And I think the best answer to that is what Chekhov said. Don't write about the man who comes home every night and has his cabbage soup and goes to bed. That is just ordinary fiction. He didn't say that, but that is what I mean by banality. Write about things of real interest. I mean, Isaac Bashevis Singer, who we'll talk about in a little while, always said to remember that the French word for a novel is roman, and German too, roman. That's what the word is for novel. Where does it come from? Romance. And without it, you don't really have a story, according to Singer. And Singer was a master at complicated romance. So literary fiction has some complication to it, has texture to it, has sophistication. It's like listening to a concert by very, very fine classical players as opposed to hard rock, say, or as opposed to polka music, or just the swing bands from my high school days. You know the difference. You know something that is really serious, and I think that's the way I would define it. Now you may not hit the mark. Believe me, I don't know if I've ever hit the mark, but you can try. You know. Even yesterday I watched Sammy Sosa struck out 3 times. And the day before he said to one of the reporters, "What do you expect me to be, Superman?" You know. But he tries, and he's a wonderful athlete. So let's talk a little bit about Singer now, since I used him as an example. Now, before I just want to quickly, one thing I did not mention was self-publishing before we go into the literary side. And I'm an expert on that because that's what I've done. Here's another expert, Leonard Woolf, the husband of Virginia Woolf. Leonard and Virginia Woolf started a press known as the Hogarth Press in London. And the Hogarth Press is still in existence. I'm sure it's a division of some huge conglomerate. But when they started it, they set their type by hand with tweezers, letter by letter. That's how they started Hogarth Press. And that's how Virginia Woolf's work was, first books were published. And they both did it. And she would sit out in the back of the house behind some packing crates and write her stories and essays and criticisms. And they published Catherine Mansfield, the whole Bloomsbury set, I think they turned down James Joyce. I would too if I was setting my type with a tweezer. But so you can do it. Dickens published the Christmas tale. He came to the U.S. He realized that his publishers were taking all his royalties at home, and he had this new story, and he decided to publish it himself. And he continued to publish many of his works himself. Private publishing is an honorable method of getting your work out, if to no one else, to yourself, to members of your family, to your friends, and if you want more recognition or try to make a profit, to the public. Particularly poems. Poems are, I mean, you can publish poems now with word processors. Get a couple of covers, staple them together, you got yourself a chapbook. And, you know, that's a start, then you can go from there. And I mean, if you're going to really get serious about this, hire a designer, get an editor, and you're talking $10,000 or $15,000. And you know, if you're selling books at $14.95, $12.95, and the book, the publisher gets 60%, the average bookstore gets 40%, unless you're on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, and then you get even less. I think they get something like 56%, and you get 44%. But, you know, let's say you get an average of 50% of your $12.95. That means you're making $6 or $7 a book. If you spent $10,000, how many books do you have to sell? Someone who has good mathematical mind to get your $10,000 back at, say, $7 a book. About 1,500 books just to break even. Just to break even. That's without shipping costs, postage, travel time, gas. So that's what you're talking about. You know, if you want to step up, say, to AAA as opposed to the majors, if you want to really put out a fine book, you're talking $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, and then you go out to try to sell it. You have to be a real salesman. My dad was a salesman, God bless him, and I used to hang around him in law school with my law school classmates. He was a lamp salesman. We'd walk across the street to the furniture market. I went to Northwestern Law School downtown, and he'd seat us here, and when small town customers came in who would buy 2 or 3 lamps, he would, you know, introduce us to that customer, and he'd wait for the big city buyers. Well, I learned how to sell. And now, typically, I've sold books all over the Chicago area, and most of the buyers are very, very nice people. Occasionally, you run into a young kid with a day's growth of beard, a baseball cap on backwards, and an earring. And the one I think I tried to sell Borders on Michigan Avenue. He was their book buyer. He gave me the lawyer's chambers back the next day. Said he didn't particularly care for it. And about a month later, it won the Carl Sandburg Award from the Friends of Chicago Public Library. So that's one of the worst examples. And if he's still at that store, I suggest they fire him. But some of the independents have just been wonderful to me. I'm not going to start mentioning names. Some of the chains have. Barnes & Noble in Deerfield has been a big backer. You don't need many backers. But I have a friend who's probably the most successful self-publisher I know, and she spent about $25,000 bringing out her book, and she has so many books left, even though she has maybe sold $50,000 worth of her books. That's all she does. She devotes her whole life to selling that book, and she makes all her furniture out of it. It's a table-sized book. She builds coffee tables, her dining room table, I think. I've never seen this, but she told me about it. So there are other uses for the books. I don't keep them at home. I don't ever want to see them. I keep them in a warehouse, which they charge you for that too. But this is a very refined business now. There are warehouses that will not only keep your books, deliver them to you, they'll fulfill your orders. All you have to do is call them and tell them to send them to so-and-so. They'll take a Visa, MasterCard. They'll run accounts for you. It just all costs money. You know, instead of getting, say, 56 net, each one of those activities drive you down. Pretty soon you're getting 40 net. I had a lady from New York called me the other day. I don't know. I think I'm paying her to buy my book. I've never met such a tough buyer in my life. So it's a tough business. But what isn't? What isn't? And if you have a unique product that you really believe in, look at this book. It won the National Small Press Award at Book America Chicago. Who would have ever believed that? Against 86 entrants. I'm 71 years old. Many of the university presses were in that competition. I never thought we'd win that. I just entered the book, and I'd never been in Israel, so I went to Israel for the first time last spring. And I knew when I left that we were in the top 3, and then when I was in Haifa, I got a fax from my son saying that we'd won. Well, the people over there didn't know the last Jewish shortstop from Adam. In fact, I'm sure they know Adam much better. So I set the book up on the bar in the hotel, and the little barman and I each had a drink, and I took a photo of him holding the book up. So you can do it. It's a great country, America. You can do anything here. But I hope that I've explained to you the procedures and the risks and the travail, and also the joy.
Who decides that you're going to win a certain award? Or do you submit your book to something in order to be in the competition?
Yes, you submit. There are many competitions. There's a mini industry that's grown out of the difficulty of getting published. So all these creative writing organizations, small publishing groups, charitable foundations, university presses, you name it, they have contests and awards. Many of them you have to pay to enter, but some of them have a lot more prominence than others. But you're judged by groups of judges, and
When you submit it, they don't select it at random?
no, for the almost entirely you submit it. Like the National Book Award, that would be wonderful. But I wouldn't have a chance at that because you're up against the largest, most prestigious presses in the country. But if you want to enter it, you write them and you send it in. I've submitted this book to about 4 different entities, and I didn't even hear from the other 3. It just disappeared down the trough of frustrated dreams. There's a little prose for you. But the one, when I won the Carl Sandburg Award, I got some bureaucratic person on the phone who said to me, "Mr. Komie," I said, "Yes." Said, "You won the CSA." I don't know what the CSA was. She hung up. "Just want to let you know you won the CSA." I had no idea. It took me a day to find out what that was. And then one of the great moments of my career was standing in a tux in front of 300 people also in formals at the Union League Club receiving the award. That was a wonderful day. My wife, who passed away 2 years ago, lived to see that. And it was great. And that came out of Chicago. It came out of the library system. And every year, the Chicago Public Library, the Friends of the Chicago Public Library, give these Sandburg Awards to Chicago writers. And this year it was won by Mrs. D'Amato, who's a very fine mystery writer, just a wonderful person and a very capable writer.
What type of awards are they?
Well, they're in all categories. I'm glad you asked that because they're in children's fiction, poetry, adult fiction, and probably some others that I've nonfiction. You know, there are 5 or 6 different categories. I don't think I can read Lowell, Komie after that, but I read a little bit because I'm working on something right now. I'm writing a novella, and it will be in The Night Swimmer. And I just wrote this this week. And if you stay to listen to this, I will reward you because I'll play the harmonica at the end of this. I always play the harmonica. I have it hidden in my pocket, and always the same song, too.
You write longhand.
Yeah, I write in longhand in these things. Unfortunately, now I have carpal tunnel, and I can't transcribe it anymore onto the word processor. So I dictate it into a little mini tape and then take it up to a steno service. Okay, here we are. This is humorous, I hope. Well, it's sort of humorous. So don't be afraid to chuckle. And you heard the audience. They gave Singer one good laugh there. The scene is this. Arthur Fabricant is my hero. I wrote a story for Chicago Magazine called The Kisses of Fabricant, and I am enlarging that, and I've got about 150 pages of it. I think it's going to be called perhaps The Kisses of Fabricant. I don't know. He's an architect from a very wealthy family, grew up in Winnetka, German Jew, went to Eastern schools, quite a patrician guy, but he's really got a lot of problems in his life. He's divorced. His wife ran off with a professor from the University of Chicago and moved to Israel. His daughters don't speak to him, although they're both at college. One's studying English, one's studying art history, endlessly, as he says. But and he pays all the freight. But he's sort of, his head is in the clouds. He's a nice man, but perhaps a weak man. I'm trying to figure out just who he is. He's not as strong a character as David Epstein, who's the so-called anti-hero of the Jewish shortstop. He has met a woman from Skokie named Trudy Altschul. Now, Trudy, Arthur put an ad in a Jewish newspaper and described himself in, in interesting terms. That he was a Francophile, a literary man, that he also liked the Bulls and the Cubs. And Trudy answered the ad. I think her first response was, Francophile, I don't know. What did the French ever do for the Jews? They sent thousands and thousands of Jewish children to concentration camps and to their death. Francophile, I don't like. Financially secure, good. That I do like. So she's a very practical woman. Now, she's gotten the local synagogue the synagogue is governed by a tight-fisted philanthropist named Mando Elegant. He wants to build what is called an eruv. Now, an eruv is a fenced enclosure where Jews Orthodox Jews on the Sabbath, when they're not allowed to do anything, not even turn a light on and off, they are permitted to walk within the eruv and do their daily tasks. So it's a fenced enclosure. It's just a thin wire, and there are a couple of eruvs up in Chicago. I think there's one in Lincolnwood. The city of Toronto has an eruv all the way around the city. There's been litigation involving this, but the wires that are put up are almost invisible. In London, they put one around Highgate, which is a very fashionable area, and there was a lot of litigation over that. But anyway, Arthur's been retained to build an eruv by this synagogue, except the tight-fisted philanthropist wants it named after him, and he doesn't just want it around the synagogue, he wants it around the entire city of Chicago. But he doesn't want it to be visible, because God forbid that the Gentiles should think that the Jews were trying to fence them in. This has to be an invisible wire. Well, so it's a real job for an architect, and he's come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Now, the only way he calls Jewish Vocational Service, which is a service that supplies people who need work, and they match you up with a position. This is quite a position. He's looking for 2 Jewish ninjas to go out at night and secretly string this wire around the city. And who do they send? I don't know if you're familiar with Goldberg, Bill Goldberg, the wrestler, the champion wrestler. Bill Goldberg beat Hulk Hogan and held the championship until just recently. Won 150 bouts in a row. And he recently lost. But he's on an ad now for the Illinois Lottery. If you see this huge guy with a head like this and a beard screaming at you about lottery tickets, that's Goldberg. But he's become a national hero. His fans sit in the wrestling matches and chant his name, Goldberg, Goldberg, Goldberg. So JVS sends his cousin, David Goldberg, who's even bigger than Bill. And David has a silent accomplice, a woman named Judith Trumpeter. She is an expert at climbing telephone poles. So between the two of them, they're going to connect up these Arab wires all throughout the city, the back alleys, wherever, along the lakefront. And if people give them trouble, Judith can quickly hook up the person's house into free cable. They'll give them free cable, they'll buy it. That'll be the end of the trouble. So this is Saturday night. The Sabbath is down. The sun's gone down. They're out there somewhere. They don't figure in this at all. Trudy Altshow, who answered the ad, has invited Arthur to her Sukkoth hut. Now, a Sukkoth hut, Sukkoth is a harvest festival, a holiday, and Jews traditionally in Eastern Europe would build a hut in the back of their yards, open to the sky, so they could see God and the stars, made out of natural materials, and sit there and eat there. The family would go outside and join them, and it was like a festival of joy, celebrating the harvest and life. Trudy has her own prefabbed Sukkoth hut that she got, and she asked Arthur to, the local rabbi won't bless her hut because it has staples in it. It has to be made all of natural materials. So Arthur suggested she bind it with leather bindings, but the rabbi won't bless that because it's made from perhaps non-kosher animals. He will bless papyrus stems, so she has Arthur over to tie this up. He's just finished tying the Sukkoth hut with these wet papyrus stems, and she's cooking dinner for him. She sighed and shook her head and then went back to the kitchen to bring the main course out, and when she left the table, suddenly he began to think of his mother and father. He'd been thinking of, when he was tying the papyrus stems and tying the Sukkoth hut, he could only make one knot, a square knot, because he remembered that from Boy Scouts. That's the only knot he knew. So his Boy Scout memories triggered a dream, and now he could clearly see his mother standing in the apron of their long pebbled driveway. It was summer, and she was on her way to the club for an afternoon tennis game, dressed in a white top and shorts, beveled white tennis shoes with tassels, and no socks. She was absent-mindedly swinging her racket, practicing her weak backhand. She seemed so relaxed, alive, young and beautiful, her brown hair tied in a bun with a black velvet ribbon, her legs tanned and muscular. That Saturday, he and other high school friends would join their parents at a summer dance at the club on the terrace high above the lake. His parents would be dressed formally, gracefully dancing cheek to cheek, while he and his friends sat in the bar in white summer linen jackets and drank filched gin and vodka tonics. Life had been simple then. His father was a banker, a Yale graduate. His mother had gone to Radcliffe. There'd been the big house in Winnetka, the Scandinavian chauffeur houseman, his wife Inga the cook, the young German woman Bertha the maid. He and his sister spent their summer summers on ranches in Colorado or Montana. His parents wintered in Nassau or Bermuda. There was never anything Jewish in his parents' lives until death intervened and a young rabbi suddenly appeared to bury each one of them. Even his sister, who died of breast cancer at 32 and had never married, met the rabbi only at her funeral. His mother, father, and sister were all in the gray granite Fabricant mausoleum. That's their last name. The name Fabricant in neat incised block Ionic letters above the barred glass and interlocked angels carved above the granite doorway. He'd paid to have the mausoleum steam cleaned twice a year to remove all the bird droppings and scum and city grit. And what of his daughter, Naomi at Stanford, studying art history for an eternity, and Rachel, her sister at Michigan, a professional English major, his wife Letty in Israel with her professor? What a triad, Letty and her two daughters, like the three graces who spun out your life, measured it, and then cut it off. Had the two girls ever visited their grandparents' and aunt's tomb? Not that he could remember. Letty had kept them away from the funerals. They were children, and they were too fragile. Mourning wasn't her métier. He hadn't seen either of his daughters in a year. He could pop up to Ann Arbor, call on Rachel. It wasn't that far, but he knew he wouldn't do it. He would disturb her studies, and there'd be another angry confrontation. The last time he talked to her, she was translating Beowulf into Hebrew. That's the first funny line. You can laugh at that. Oh, there isn't much more. Trudy returned with a beautiful brisket encircled by a ring of peas and rather a ring of brown potatoes and edged with peas and carrots. This is hard for me to read. I can hardly read my own writing. She served it with a gravy decanter where the gravy was poured under the mouth of a silver swan with a ruby glass body. She served him artfully, pouring grocery. I forgot a line. She also brought out a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon from the Golan. She served him artfully, pouring gravy at his desire, serving warm rolls topped in a basket topped with a pink napkin matching her blouse. Eat, Arthur. Fress. That's the Jewish word for eat, like S in German, fress. Eat, Arthur, fress. What are you doing? What are you thinking? You're so quiet. I was thinking about my childhood and my family. He tried some of the brisket covered with gravy. This is delicious, Trudy, really delicious. I haven't had brisket for years. Thank you. You were raised on the North Shore? Where? In what suburb? Winnetka. Very fancy. I didn't know that. I didn't know there were any Jews in Winnetka in those days. Very few. Just a few families, almost all German Jews. So you come from wealth, old money, German Jewish aristocrats. I guess you could say that except for the aristocrat part. We always pretended that we weren't wealthy, but we really were. Both of my parents were left trust funds. My father was a banker, but he wasn't too serious about it. He loved life too much to be serious about banking. My parents were educated in Eastern schools. I studied architecture at Harvard. My wife went to Smith. I never met a Jewish man who went to Harvard. We belonged to a country club, also a city club. My father played golf every Saturday and Sunday, each summer of his life. We met him for Sunday dinner on the veranda of the club. It was a privileged life. We were privileged people. Here, you eat like a bird, Arthur. Have some simmus. Simus? What's simus? It's a mixture, prunes and carrots. Try it. It's also a Yiddish word, a simus. Don't make a big simus out of it. Don't make it Erev you're designing for us. Don't make it such a big deal. Just wires, Arthur. Just connect wires. Earlier he'd been trying to convince them to have vapor trails that would dissolve, around the city, send up missiles, and they would explode in the